Hola, muy buenas tardes. Muchas gracias por venir hoy a Centro. Sé que es un día horrendo de tráfico y de eventos de Sonamaco y gracias por escoger esta plática hoy. Mi nombre es Kerstin Scheu, soy la directora de Centro y bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Y me da muchísimo gusto que sí, tener enorme, este enorme honor de tener hoy a Tom Dixon con nosotros. Pues yo soy un gran fan de su trabajo, seguramente muchos en el público también. Y quiero agradecer en particular a Rodrigo Fernández de Diez Company, quien pues es el anfitrión, quien trajo a Tom Dixon aquí y que quiere compartir con ustedes unas palabras sobre su trayectoria. Gracias. Gracias.
Hola, buenas tardes. Soy Rodrigo Fernández, soy el director y cofundador de Diez Company. En Diez Company nos proponemos liderar la escena de la iluminación en México, fomentando la creatividad y la colaboración entre marcas. Y durante 19 años nos hemos consolidado como la compañía líder en diseño, desarrollo y manufactura de proyectos de iluminación en México y América Latina. Somos impulsores de la cultura de la luz a través de exposiciones como Maison Diez y la recién inaugurada Galería Saint-Ancois. Tenemos el privilegio de contar con la presencia de Tom Dixon en la Ciudad de México, aquí en la Universidad Centro, cuna de talentos nacionales. La charla Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow nos sumergirá en su viaje creativo y empresarial. El equilibrio entre creatividad y negocios que le ha permitido a Dixon fundar Tom Dixon Studio y ser una de las empresas globales más prestigiosas en diseño y arte. Tom Dixon, reconocido por creaciones icónicas desde los 80, demuestra una creatividad sin límites. A través de su firma, crea objetos extraordinarios en iluminación, muebles y accesorios. Aunque autodidacta, explora la cerámica, la pintura y la música antes de dedicarse al diseño. Su habilidad para la soldadura, adquirida tras un accidente en moto, le permitió crear la famosa silla pylon y otras piezas que han revolucionado el diseño y la historia. Con presencia en 65 países, Tom Dixon lanza sus nuevas colecciones cada 2 años en eventos destacados. Su contribución al diseño e innovación lo hizo merecedor de la Orden del Imperio Británico en 2001 y del título de Diseñador del Año en Maison Objet en 2014. En 2019 recibió reconocimientos como la medalla de plata al mejor jardín en el RHS Chelsea Flower Show y la prestigiosa London Design Medal en los British Land Celebration of Design Awards. Diez Company es el representante de Tom Dixon en México y me gustaría que le demos una cálida bienvenida. Gracias.
Hola. Hola? Okay. That's so I'm going to start off. I've called this yesterday, today, and tomorrow because I have never made a lecture in Mexico. So I don't know how much you know about my history, but I wanted to talk a bit about how I became a designer. I'm going to talk a bit about how I made my own brand, my own label, and then maybe a few stories about the future of my design, I guess. So I start at the very beginning. You can see a very scared looking child here, not very good at drawing. And it was really a bit later at school that I discovered design. Really, when I think back through clay, clay is a very formless, ugly, greasy material, cold, and very quickly you can turn it into something desirable. And I was lucky to be in a school which, although it was very bad academically, it was amazing from a practical point of view. It had a good woodwork department and a great ceramics department. So when I think back, this was the moment when I discovered the power of the imagination to transform materials into something functional and desirable. Of course, like most kids my age, I was not interested in design. I was interested in music. And when I left school, what happened? I think everybody was, everybody was entranced by youth culture at the time, and you defined yourself through music more than anything. And so everybody was in a band, but I happened to be in a band which took off, and we signed a record deal. And unfortunately, after 2 years of being a disco bass player in a band, I had a motorbike accident, and I broke my leg, and I broke my arm as well. So I could not go out on tour, and I couldn't play music. Now, I had been collecting vintage motorcycles and cars, and so I'd learned how to weld. And I think it's really through the process of welding that I discover a completely other way of making things. Anybody who's done welding, I can recommend it because it's a very quick way of prototyping things. It's a very strong way of putting things together, and almost instantly you can put together structures which are real structures that can hold weight and can perform in the way that a real object can do. So you can prototype things for real with welding. So it was a superpower that I found and really suited my impatience in terms of wanting to get out ideas very quickly. So I'm going to show you some of the very early objects that I made. Even this one is before welding, so you can see there's nothing beautiful about this object. It's very dangerous. It's quite rusty. It's not very elegant. But what's kind of interesting about it is that it happens to be that I was the only person doing this kind of work at the time. And I think if I think of one problem for this generation is how to be anonymous. You know, I could make this work, nobody would care. I could make lots of it and still nobody would care, but I had time to develop an aesthetic which was uniquely mine. So I'm gonna, this is very responsive. So here are some even uglier chairs and some more objects. They're kind of interesting because, like I said, they've got their own style. They're all made out of free materials. And what was important by not going to art school, but just making these things for pleasure, was that I made a lot of them. I think all too often design schools can be quite restrictive. You have a project, you have to complete it in a certain amount of time, and then you move on to the next project. I could make hundreds of different things because the materials were free. I was still making money from music in the evenings, so my days were free. And I was able to develop what was this unique, ugly style, which was very much influenced, I think, by the youth culture that I inhabited, where people in the music business, for sure, were able to pick up their own instrument, make their own tunes, create their own posters and t-shirts, make their own gigs, and develop almost like a business from music. And so I learned from music the power of taking your own creativity and turning it into a performance and turning it into a living. And that's what I transferred into furniture. So often I like to think of this business that we're involved with as kind of alchemy. You know, here I was doing it literally. I was getting rubbish from the street and I was turning it into gold. You know, people were paying me to do this stuff. And if there's another thing that you don't often learn at art school is the pleasure of somebody paying for your work. So very early on, it gave me a legitimacy about my work, which was endorsed by other people because they're prepared to pay for it, for this ugly metalwork, right? So it's often a dirty word in design, the money word. But for me, it was kind of transformational. I could have an idea one day, I could weld it, and even in the evening, I might be able to sell this object. Now, I wasn't precious about the work, and I sold for very low prices, which allowed me to make more work. So I had to clear out my tiny little studio and get rid of stuff so I could make more. So I think if you were a ballet dancer or if you were a classical musician, practice would be the thing. Every day, 8 hours, you know, 4 hours or 5 hours of practice. And for me, it was the same thing. By practicing and practicing, I became a designer. So you can see what happens is that my welding improved. You know, I become more structural and more formal in my shapes. They start to be a bit more elegant as well. And I move from using found objects to using new material. And you can see, even when I'm using recycled material, in this case, the steering wheel from a Volkswagen and the inner tube from the tire of a car. You know, very comfortable material, the rubber, but very dirty and very smelly as well. So this was not a commercial success. Now, I was making this in the UK at a time which was not particularly interested in design at all, but it was around that time that my work got discovered by an Italian company called Cappellini. And you can see here the Italian version of the very rough British chair. All of a sudden, they've tidied it up. It's lost a lot of its character, but it's become a slick and designer object which has got suddenly an international market. So mine, completely uncommercial, nobody bought this object at all. And all of a sudden it's taken to Italy, and I discover the power of design into industry. So the Italians are amazing at improving things. They're amazing also at global distribution and communication of luxury items. And this object goes from being something I was selling one or two of in London to selling hundreds all over the world, and eventually ends up in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So this gives me an international profile, and I suddenly realized that I am a designer, because until then I was just somebody that made things pretty much for fun, and then I sold them. So I spent 10 years, you know, working with my own studio, working for the Italians, the luxury brands, and then I decided it's time to get a proper job. And I'm kind of lucky to get my proper job in a company called Habitat, which is, you know, a chain store with maybe 70 stores all over Europe selling homeware, but it's owned by the giant IKEA. So I go from being a self-producing metalworker to working for the biggest furniture company in the world. And this is where I learn all kinds of things beyond metalwork and producing my own furniture. This is where I learn about branding, I learn about communication, but more importantly, I learn about international sourcing, and I learn about how people actually buy homewares. It's very easy to be seduced by the magazine pictures of the most exciting objects, but in this company, I learn very much what people really buy. But I also get involved in all kinds of different categories of objects that product designers don't always get involved in. Duvet covers and cuddly toys and art for the wall, plants. But I also get to know the whole world of where things are produced and manufactured and at what price. So corporate life is really my university of not design, but business and, like I say, communication and branding. And after 10 years in the corporation, I get very bored and I feel it's time to start designing again. So I start my own label, and I'm very lucky to have a very short name, which is quite easy to brand. And I like to think of branding like the cowboys. It's like you stamp your mark of quality into an object, and your mark of ownership into an object. And so, like I said, I've got a name that's quite easily pronounceable internationally, so that's kind of nice. Even in Japan, they think I've invented this name and that I do not exist for real. But the reason I do this is because for designers in product design, it's very hard to get your own universe. So let's take Herman Miller, which is currently the biggest furniture company in the world. A lot of designers would like to work for Herman Miller, but if you work as a contemporary designer for Herman Miller, you're up against the giants of industrial design from the 1950s. They're all dead, okay, but they're still your competition. And even worse, you're up against maybe 40, 50, or 60 other designers that are very much alive and competing for your space. Kind of interesting to see how few women there are in Herman Miller, for sure. But this is the space that exists for product designers or furniture designers to work within. So you sit within a brand, which is the manufacturer or the distribution brand, but you're just one of a whole school of designers that are working for the brand. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do my own label, and that's really why I started Tom Dixon. So putting all my learnings into this vehicle, I started producing stuff. And we do furniture, you know, relatively simple. I like to think of this as kind of expressive minimalism. We do really concentrate on kind of the quality of materials and the weight of materials. We've got a fairly industrial kind of look sometimes. And you'll see quite often in the objects a decorative aspect, but not so much applied decoration, more structural decoration, which is what you saw in those very early pylon chairs that I was making. So the decoration is almost never applied. It's really part of the structure, which is my main interest in design, is how things are put together. Still very decorative, I think, but not with applied decoration. And then we do a lot of lighting, and lighting is a very exciting field at the moment because it's in full evolution from an engineering perspective, but it's also a transformative object. And I think where people are increasingly conservative in furniture, with lighting they allow themselves to be more fantastical and to dream a little bit and to be a bit more modern. You know, the light is part of the modern world, but it's also a transformative object in a space. It's a space, you know, it's an object that can really set a mood or transform from night to day a space. And I work a lot, again, you see these kind of patterns that exist, really there to make a shadow and to make a kind of natural illumination from the lamp. And you'll see all kinds of different kind of filters and refractions and shadows emerging from our lights. Some of them, you know, using technology from coffee filters. Some of them taking inspiration from things like a Japanese umbrella, for instance. And sometimes the inspirations come from far away as well. So I just wanted to tell you a little story about, you know, a project I did with a university where I was too busy to do this project, which was brought to me by the British Council. It's like, please come and work with these street workers, these street metal workers in Nigeria, in Lagos, and come and work with these metal workers in Jaipur in India that work on the street. They need some new designs, they need to reach international markets, and we want you to design some things. Now, I was very busy doing other stuff, but I was teaching at the Royal College, and I decided what I'd do, I'd drop off 6 students in Lagos, and I'd drop off 6 students in Jaipur, and then I'd go home and do my day job. So that was a disaster, and the students came back with a lot of very complicated things which were impossible for the people to make. So I ended up working with this lot of metal workers and just trying to transfer an existing object, in this case these water jugs that are made in brass and copper, that were traditionally used to carry water in the villages, just taking some of those shapes and those techniques and really turning them upside down. Now, the reason for this is because the metal workers used to make these objects, but in large part through industrialization and internationalization, these metal pots are now replaced with much more, much lighter and much cheaper alternatives in plastic. So the metal workers are losing their jobs. And I just thought the shapes were so beautiful here that we could probably just use them to do some lighting, which was my field at the time. So here we find just not too much design, just repurposing of shapes and rethinking of objects for a new function. So that worked kind of well in terms of, you know, just a quick acknowledgement of the beauty of these objects and then a repurposing of the function. What's kind of interesting, though, is that they've been immensely copied, and most of the lamps that you see out there, apart from Diez, of course, are copies. So here you see a Tom Dixon replica. They're using our photography, but they're made in China not by the Indian metalworkers at all, and they're about a quarter of the price of ours. Oops, now, so no longer made by these guys, but made industrially in China. And if you look on eBay, we found maybe up to 800,000 of these objects available online right now. This has become quite a big problem for us in terms of image and also in terms of selling our slightly higher priced products. And it's kind of interesting that it's almost impossible to stop. So what I kind of liked was also seeing, something that looked a bit like my lights in IKEA, to get back to IKEA. And then, interesting enough, a hack that was available online so that you could have a really cheap Tom Dixon lamp by buying an IKEA bowl and then hanging it upside down, which brought it really back to, my initial thinking around the water jugs that I was using the aesthetics of. So it's kind of nice to be copied and then recopied and then hacked in that way. And my way of coping is probably by January is I'll produce myself an authorized fake of my own lamp, which will be available in Mexico real soon. Whoops. So there you see the result. Not bad, right? The fake Tom Dixon. So yeah, you see the inspirations come from everywhere. They might come from, like I said, folding umbrellas. Here, the idea of a lamp that is huge but folds down really flat into a pizza box for transport, so you're not transporting huge amounts of air around the world. And also allowing, just like an umbrella, several different shapes to be created from one lamp by pulling or pushing the springs up and down. Other inspirations could be from industrial objects like car headlamps, where I love the pressed glass, very industrial. Oh my God, stop clicking. And here you see again this idea of decoration used in a kind of functional way. So here the decoration is creating circular lenses in this very, very thick industrial glass, really to diffuse and to diffract the lighting as it comes out of the light source, so that there's no hot spots. And you can see the decorative effects of making lenses out of thick glass. Oh my God, it's got life of its own, this clicker. And then, you see with this lamp here, again, an obsession with the internal reflections and the possibilities of moving light around the object like we're doing here. Yeah, so this has become our most popular lamp, really because it looks like almost like an organic, natural object. It's very much industrially produced. It looks like glass, but it's actually polycarbonate, which is the toughest plastic on the planet. And it looks like everyone looks like it's different, but that's only because of the angle that you view it in. So it's made by a very high-tech method called vacuum metallization, where they explode a tiny piece of aluminium inside the object, inside a vacuum, and it coats the lamp with maybe 1 or 2 microns of metal surface, which is just thick enough to be metallic, but thin enough to be transparent. So what you see is the light bouncing off the different surfaces, and every angle that you look at the lamp from gives you pretty much a different lamp altogether. So I'm very interested in the journey of light through objects, just in general, and the way that you can really use light to really make these magical effects that you see here. So you see these objects used in huge projects like this, and oh my Lord, and lots of different versions of the same lamp in multiples, and also used in 2 or 3 different sizes. And I've become fascinated with the advances in lighting that are going on at the moment. It's definitely one of the fields which is really driven by extraordinary innovation at the moment. So these portable lamps are a good example of how exciting it is to work in the field of lighting at the moment. You know, really because of the revolution that's going on in transport and in mobile devices generally, battery power has become so much more efficient that it allows you finally to have, just like you did 200 years ago, movable light. So we used to walk around with candles, and now we're going to find ourselves walking around with light again. So really transforming our idea of how we illuminate a space. No longer do we have to be tethered to the wall or to the ceiling by a cord, you know, the ugly cord, but you can have 10 or 12 hours of mobile luminosity. And I really think that fundamentally that's going to change completely the way that we illuminate spaces. So these are our first portable lamps, and they're working really rather well. So that was the glass again. So that's lighting. We talked a bit about furniture. We also do accessories, which is a kind of great way of working in lots of different, having adventures in lots of different typologies of object, whether that's, you know, food preparation, or, you know, tea ceremonies, or, you know, cocktails, you know, or, you know, even flower arranging. You're able to explore lots of different possibilities, including even perfume. You know, so what's kind of nice about the job of designer is that you can really inhabit lots of different worlds, the chef world, for instance, or, like I said, collaborate with flower people or with barmen, and really get your information from the people that are experts in the field. And really my objective is to try and stay as naive as I was at the beginning, and really be interested in other people's business as a designer. So we do all this from London in our headquarters. So this is a Victorian, maybe 200-year-old building in the middle of London. Again, opposite an art school, Central St. Martin's, which is the biggest art school in Europe, I think, particularly for fashion. And we have a restaurant at the end, which has really informed a lot of the adventures that we've had in tableware, the design studio in the middle, and underneath a retail shop as well. And the restaurant's been a really big inspiration for us in terms of functionality, and also in terms of really abusing objects. Restaurants and hotels are particularly horrific environments for furniture and lighting and accessories to inhabit, because they're abused every day by a different person. So you have to have things which are really robust, and that really informs some of the decisions we make about design. So this is a series of furniture called Fat, which is really informed by our adventures in the restaurant business, in terms of how people use or abuse furniture. I mean, I'm a very impatient person, so I like to sit in things back to front, or on the backrest of a chair. I'll sit on the side. So these chairs are really imagined to be as much about improperly using chairs as properly using them. They're interesting because they come in a very simple shape, and when you're designing restaurants, you want chairs which are not too expressive, so that you can multiply them. They come in bar stool and lounge and dining chair. And they're called Fat because I think that's the objective of upholstery, is to be generous and comforting and fat and plump, you know. So just by inflating the upholstery part, I get an aesthetic which is uniquely ours, not really by doing a great deal of designing, but just making one part more expressed than the other. So you'll see when you multiply them, you still get this very simple shape, but you're able to use them in large quantities in places like restaurants. So another inspiration, I guess, for me is also materials, just like I was saying at the very beginning with ceramics, where suddenly the clay became everything. Aluminium is a kind of interesting material, you know, particularly from a sustainability point of view. It's a very hard and an ugly way of extracting metal from the ground. Happens a lot in Brazil. But once it's out of the ground, it's one of the most recyclable materials ever, that you can be infinitely recycled. In fact, it's judged that maybe 75% of all aluminium that exists is still in use today, which is a pretty phenomenal equation. And plastic can't be recycled infinitely, but aluminium can. So I'm interested in materials, but also the way that you work them. And aluminium has got an amazing possibility in terms of handcraft. It's light, it's soft, so it allows you to beat it. That's why they used it for cars at the very beginning. And you can make a really amazing craft work with it. And these are bowls that we're making where we really leave the mark of the hammer and the manufacturing in the object itself. So I kind of still love craft, but I also love industry. And I want to talk a bit about this chair, which is here, because it's a kind of pretty archetypical of what I was talking about in terms of structural decoration. And we see here a chair which is extremely light, you know, to the point of, and that's really able to be this light because of the ridges, you know, because of the corrugations. And you see this a lot on roofs all over the world, you know, where corrugated iron is used because it's really functional. But on this chair, every single one of these half tubes that's created on this chair is there really to hold up a very light structure. I think what's interesting when you start using these techniques which have always been around is you start producing objects where it's very hard to place this object in a kind of design history. It could easily be an Art Deco chair, right? But it could also be a Jetsons chair from the 1950s, or it could be a postmodern chair from the 80s as well. And I think when you use these tricks of structure, and when there's a reason to apply decoration like that, you can get intemporal objects. And I think from a sustainability point of view, it's really quite important for us to attempt to breed out fashionability from an object so that things will come back in a second cycle and be reused, not recycled so much, but just reused many, many times. So materials are kind of interesting. You know, sustainability is the big topic, and we can look at different types of sustainability. Obviously, the recycling aspect is interesting, being very careful about how you use the material in the minimum quantities, or sometimes even in the maximum quantities. And cork is something also that I've been exploring quite a lot recently, which is the most extraordinary material for being actually carbon positive. So because you don't cut down the tree when you're taking the cork off, you find a material here which is actually embedding the carbon whilst the forest still grows. It takes something like 27 years for a cork tree to become a producing tree for cork, and then you can only harvest every 7 years. So the people really plant for the next generation, not for themselves. And what you get is this kind of incredible material, which is obviously been used a lot for throwaway purposes, like your wine bottle cork, but also for things like shoes, you know, for thousands of years. But it's also used for things like the re-entry vehicle for space race. So astronauts are protected by cork as they come back down from the atmosphere because it's got amazing thermal properties. And it's got also amazing acoustic properties as well. So suddenly you get objects which, if you use them in quite a big mass, not only have you got embodied carbon, but you've also got an acoustic benefit as well. Cork is particularly good at absorbing sound. So in a restaurant, for instance, a cork table is a really brilliant thing. It's waterproof, so you can leave it outside. It's fireproof. And actually, you know, when I was talking about perfumes, it also smells amazing as well. So the way we get the color, this dark color on this cork is by charring it, which releases a very strong bonfire odor from your furniture as well. So you get smelly furniture, acoustically, you know, so you're really tackling all the different senses here. So cork, a miracle material, which I think has been used forever, but can be used in new ways now with CNC routing. And, you know, I think from a technological perspective, I wanted to go back a little bit to lighting and talk about lighting just in general as just this field which is in full transition. You know, I talked about battery technology, but it's not just the battery technology, it's also the LED technology. So you've got these more powerful batteries, but you've also got much, much more efficient light sources where you're using something like an eighth or a tenth of the power that you used to with electrical lighting because it's gone electronic and it's not wasting its power through heat. So you've seen these amazing steps forwards in technology, and that's when designers can get to work, right? So when there's big shifts in how people behave, or big shifts in which materials exist, like what happened after the war in the 1950s and 60s, new materials came on the scene. But now we're seeing digitalization and electronics coming through as the big theme. And I think, all too often with contemporary lighting, you're just seeing people mimicking conventional lighting. So even me, I'm doing a shade which could be a shade that was there before with an incandescent lamp. But what I wanted to do with this specific project was to celebrate the circuit board and celebrate the LED as a thing in itself, and really show it in its full glory. I mean, a circuit board is a big thing, but it's always hidden inside a computer, inside your car, inside your phone. You never see the circuit board in all its miniature glory, right? And there's something quite beautiful about that also as a matrix behind the LED chip. So I kind of put together a circuit board and some LED chips to make a module. So this is nothing but the circuit board. No cover, no enclosure, no big block of aluminium behind it, just no lens, no nothing, just the circuit board. And the idea here was really to try and create a celebration of the circuit board, but also a kit, So with two shapes, a circle and a square, the idea was really to provide other designers, other interior designers, with almost like a Lego kit for construction of light. So here we have a circle and a square, which you can put together in different configurations in the flat like this, mainly on a track, conventional track from a track lighting company. And it allows you this kind of vast possibilities that you can do, just like Morse code, a whole language from just two components, a dot and a dash, where you could start creating totems and take lighting away from the ceiling track or the wall track and really start placing it even in the middle of the room in a completely different way from normal conventional track lighting. So what's kind of nice here is that you suddenly develop this whole series of different possibilities of illuminating space using multiple flat LEDs, which can be put, like I say, against the wall, along the skirting. And you start to deconstruct the light completely and take it away from this idea that it has to either be a spotlight or a diffusing light. Now, I went completely mad with these things and ended up with 83,000 LEDs on this object here, which makes this incredibly bright object, which is almost like having a sun inside your room. But what's great about LEDs is you can turn it down and have a sunset as well as full daylight. But it's happening right in the middle of your room. Or you can put it flat against the wall like you do here, or even make kind of sculptures from it as well. So with this kit, the objective is really to pull myself away from what I'd always been trying to do before, which is to produce the perfect object and produce something where it was completely unfinished as a project, but it was a complete kit of parts, which allowed you 1,000 configurations as interior designers, right? A bit like Meccano, maybe. So I got a bit obsessed with this idea of providing toolkits for other designers. It's been a commercial disaster. Nobody really wants to play with my toolkits, but this is the similar idea in terms of trying to find, one simple element, in this case a very highly polished brass tube, and just thinking of connections, invisible connectors inside, which allow you to make 1,000 different objects. So here you see my studio really, oh my God, right. So these are not my ideas, most of them. These are my studio's ideas, just saying, well, okay, if you've got this tube, you can make 1,000 different possibilities just by having a right angle and a 90-degree angle and a 45-degree angle connector. Still recognizable as my furniture, not designed by me, but just a decision to use a specific type of tube. So I think this idea of adaptability and is now really possible, particularly with also the miniaturization of machine tools, so that everybody's got access to CNC in a way that was impossible when I started out. So, I mean, roughly speaking, that's what we do. I wanted to just talk a bit about yeah, maybe a future project. So I wanted to talk about my retirement plan, or even, being an entrepreneur is quite dangerous. You can lose your company at any point. My company is actually majority owned by a private equity firm, so I could lose my name. This is very familiar in the fashion business, right? Where you can very easily lose everything that you've built up because you've had investment put into your company. So I have to have an escape route, right? An escape route is underwater. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about this project. So I found this amazing 1970s visionary biologist and architect called Wolf Hilberts, who'd been working on building underwater cities. And he wanted to build them underwater and float them to the surface. So a very contemporary subject here, but of course it didn't really work. But the technique of making natural concrete underwater did work. And so I tested out his recipe, if you like, which is you get some very thin metal rod, maybe 8 millimeters concrete reinforcement bar, and then you put it into the ocean. Has to be somewhere warm. Cancun would work, for instance, but this is the Bahamas. And you charge the metal framework with a very small voltage, very safe voltage, maybe 6 volts of electricity from a solar panel. And what happens is that it starts attracting the calcium from the water, the minerals that exist in seawater naturally. So just like electroplating, you're starting to attract minerals onto your framework. And what it's creating is a natural cement, or actually a calcium carbonate, which is the same as chalk or same as limestone. So here I am, almost naked, fishing my chair out of the sea in the Bahamas after 1 year. And then after 3 years, it starts looking pretty interesting in terms of concrete growth, natural cement. Also, it's attracting a lot of sea life. Sponges and fish breed in this environment. So it's a bit of a shame to take it out, I think. And here, after 4 years, you're really seeing some really fat deposits of this natural. So, hang on. So here you see a cross section through, which sort of explains a bit better, like growing like tree rings. And if it's a cold winter, it'll grow a bit less. If it's a hot winter, it will grow a bit faster. But this is 4 years of growth. So you're going from 8 millimeters to something like 20 centimeters of natural cement on the chair. And what's extraordinary is it's not just the cement that grows onto these structures. It's also an amazing way of regenerating coral. So the experiments that Wolf Hilberts continued to do was no longer about building cities under the water. It was about regenerating coral, which is obviously a very hot topic alongside cement use in terms of sustainability. But what happens with the electrical charge on the metal frameworks is that you can take broken coral, just wrap it onto the metal structure, and it will grow back maybe 4 or 5 times faster than it would in natural circumstances because of the electrical charge. So this has been proven. This is a project in Bali from a sub company of Wolf Hilberts called the Coral Reef Alliance. And so in my mind, my plan is really this, is that instead of fishing out my chairs, I would make almost like an orchard inside the sea. So a permanent structure which stays there, which is regenerating coral. And hanging on the structure, you're starting to see objects that you can fish out. So we grow the coral on the permanent structure. It becomes maybe a dive attraction for tourists, so providing money for local businesses. It becomes a haven for sea life, so that breeding of shellfish and fish just in general inside the structure. And coral has this other hidden benefit. Coral reefs actually slow down also beach erosion, which is increasingly a big problem in terms of extreme weather events that you've seen here in Mexico, where whole beaches are washed away. So what's great about coral is really the fact that you can it slows down the wave power because it's semi-transparent. You know, man's natural reaction to beach erosion is just to dump a load of concrete blocks into the water and to try and stop the erosion that way. All that does is to reflect the power of the waves back, and then the problem moves to the next beach down the street. But with coral reefs, you're able to have these transparent structures that actually slow down the ocean waves. So you've got here something which generates a natural cement, which provides a benign environment for sea life. Potentially shellfish and oysters grow faster on it as well, but the coral regenerates a lot faster as well. So that's my plan, and I just sit there on the beach, okay? Maybe occasionally fishing out a chair and selling it on the international art market, maybe here in Mexico. And that's what my plan is. So here, just to finish off, because I know we're in the world of artificial intelligence and everybody's a bit scared about it, is a few visualizations that we created to try and sell this project to the next location, which is using AI really to generate a lot of different possible kind of attractive visuals to sell to people that are owning the seafront. And also to kind of illustrate what happens maybe after 2 or 3 years of increased growth on the seabed, these fantastical structures and the increased marine life. So there you have it. Me in the near future in Cancun with my underwater factory. Okay, so that's it. Actually, I've got one person who's actually fallen asleep over there. I'm so boring. Okay, so thank you very much. I think what we're going to do now is probably, there's been some questions asked, right? So I'm going to bring back Rodrigo. Thank you. Just press the thing.
That's it? Yeah? Okay, good.
Please sit on the most comfortable chair in the world.
Exactly. Here we are. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for an amazing presentation. Very insightful. We did some questions in advance that we got from the students, and I'm gonna read a few of them. And for example, there's one from Vanessa Quiroz, and she's asking, what kind of advice would you give to an emergent designer?
Oh, this is question number 1, right? I know. Question number 1 is sustainability, right? Question number 2 is advice for the emerging designer. So, my advice is, there's 2 advices really. One which is, you know, you're in an amazing moment in history, right? Where the most powerful tools that probably ever existed are coming to you, and a lot of them are free. Right? This has never happened before in industrial revolutions. Before, you had to pay for huge factories to do work, right? Even recently, you had to buy, you know, a lot of licenses to use your digital tools, right? But you've got all of these amazing tools coming at you really fast in a really scary way, and it's time to grab them and to use them, right? So designers need to be open to the latest developments. The only problem with it is that it's happening so fast that it's really hard to keep up with those tools. So that's one thing, is that you're living in an extraordinary age. And that doesn't happen very often. You know, it really doesn't happen very often. It's happening right now. So you need to grab that moment and to use all of these tools to improve the world. Because otherwise people will use them to do evil, right? So designers are there to improve the world, I think.
Yeah.
And there's a moment where, even in my not very good way here, I'm using them to try and promote my project. I was able to generate these images much faster than I would have, and much cheaper, so that I can convince people that this is a great project. Right. I can use those digital tools to create a digital twin for a physical installation in the sea, right? So I have a very small installation here, I measure it, and I feed that data into my digital twin, which can work on one of the amazing platforms like Unreal Engine and predict what my installation would look like really huge in another location. So there's these tools that you can use, you know, as a catalyst for your ideas, basically. Right. That's one thing. And then the other bit of information or advice I always give is, try not to be like anybody else. Really try and be yourself. And I think Mexico also is in an amazing situation globally right now. It's a great place where you can make things, so you still manufacture. UK, not so much, right? You've got proximity to amazing markets. You've got great design schools, and you've got also access to these amazing commerce tools, which are universal, right? So your competition no longer is Europe, your competition is probably India or Taiwan, right? But you've got access to Etsy and Instagram, so you can immediately become famous through TikTok, right? So I never had any of that shit, right? But you do, and you've got to use that to try and be, and the only way you can win in that game is by being unique. And I think Mexico's got a uniqueness about it, which has not been really explored enough on the international design scene, and you need to use that as well.
Right. It's tough, no? In a sea of sameness, it's always tough, especially in this world. There's another question, and I'm going to open also a few questions to the audience. It's from Lucila Gutierrez, and I'm going to add up to her question as well. With such a diverse array of subjects to explore after studying or being into art or music and all that you mentioned, what motivated you specifically to work in lighting? And I would add, like, obviously the evolution of lighting, it goes so fast. Like, how do you deal with the speed of technology in doing more lighting? Like, what's the next lighting for Tom Dixon?
Well, I think, it's not been that fast, really. I mean, specifically LED technology, which is what fascinates me at the moment.
Yeah.
I remember 15 years ago, it was around, nobody wanted to buy it. It was too expensive.
Yeah.
It was too ugly. Nobody knew how to use it. And everybody rejected LED bulbs until California started insisting legally that people integrated LED because they needed to reduce their power consumption, right? So suddenly government legislation kicked in, and then factories started being able to invest, and then designers came at the end and tried to make the stuff pretty, right?
Yeah.
Pretty acceptable to the consumer. Yeah. So that took 15 years for that. So that's not fast, right? Yeah. That's not really fast in terms of adoption. But what I was trying to explain with that project that I showed you just then is that I don't think anybody's really cracked all of the amazing possibilities that exist by not having a single light source anymore. Yeah. You see what's happening with LED projections all over buildings in Shanghai or at rock concerts with Taylor Swift or, whoever, and all of that can be, I wouldn't put it in your home, but that shows you the potential of full color LEDs and flat panel LEDs and the multiplication and the deconstruction of light in a way that's never been possible before, still using relatively small amounts of energy.
Right.
It's kind of amazing.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how that translates to the domestic life in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to open a few questions for the audience. I know there's a few microphones around, so if anyone would like to ask something live to Tom. Here, we have a few hands.
Are you comfortable, Rodrigo?
Yeah, very much, actually. Yeah.
Hello, here. What's one of the biggest challenge that you had to face throughout your career, or and how did you solve it?
Boy. I mean, your whole life will be challenges, right? I mean, I do think that, I was quite enjoying the music business, and the challenge was breaking my arm. I was very stupid. I was on a motorcycle. I was looking at a girl, and I smashed into a car. And that was the end of my music career. The person who was the bass player that replaced me became the bass player from Pink Floyd. The replacement, so that could have been me, right? And so that's a big regret, So I've ended up in a career where I've overcome that challenge of changing into something different, and doing something which used some of that knowledge from, without even really realizing it. It's like I was saying, it was kind of interesting when I look back because I didn't do anything consciously. You know, I didn't go into the music business consciously. I didn't go into design consciously. But what you're doing all the time is just is making your own luck and taking advantage of it. But that's not really answering my question. I think your question was, what's my biggest challenges? I think being owned by a finance company is quite a big challenge, actually, and anybody who's been in that situation. So I thought I tried lots of different models. It's like, I'll make my own things and do my own things with my own hands. So that was like craft. And then I worked for the Italian luxury companies, so that was working for the big brands. And then I had my own metalwork factory, and that was kind of interesting for a while, but I wasn't very good at people management. And then I went into the big company, and that got boring after a while because I wanted to do things myself again. So I started my own brand, but I needed investment in it. So I gave away the majority part of my company for investment. So that's been a big challenge because you're told what to do again. So I thought I'd found liberty by using my own name, but I haven't really, right? So that's still a challenge, just on a general basis. Yeah, I think be very careful about that kind of stuff.
Or who you sell your name to. Also be careful.
Yeah, maybe.
Also, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Have one more question here.
Hello, I'm Paulina.
Hello.
I wanted to ask you, how has the idea of 1,000-year guaranteed evolved for you?
The 1,000-year guarantee. Well, I mean, for me, it seems obvious is that, if you want to be properly sustainable, you can talk about kind of recycling, and you can talk about materials, but the beauty of this profession is that if you produce something which is used for many, many generations, it suddenly becomes sustainable just because it's still desirable, right? So I live with my great-grandmother's writing desk, which she bought as an antique, right? So she bought it, and I think it must be Louis XV, right? So that's maybe 8 or 9 generations of use for one object, which in itself is made from wood. So I think one of the things that I'm trying to do is to breed in longevity into things. And because we've been going for 21 years, I'm starting to see my stuff come back on the secondary market. So I see it sometimes on eBay, cheap. Sometimes I see it at the car boot, really cheap. Sometimes in the auction house, very expensive. And sometimes even in antique shops now. So that's kind of very satisfying to me to see it in a completely new context, particularly when it's with things from another century. So just recently in London, I saw them hanging above a Victorian, garden bench, in an antique shop window. And I was like, yeah, this has worked, right? So this is the second generation, but it's also being put with things that have been there for 100 or 200 years, right? So I'm working on this idea of the 1,000-year guarantee. And I think it's actually relatively easy as long as you pick your materials correctly. You frame the guarantee in terms of no misuse, please. You make sure spare parts are available. And I can give a 1,000-year guarantee. The problem is I can't get anybody in my company to believe that we should give a 1,000-year guarantee, right? They're scared. They're so scared. Whereas I just think, well, it's the minimum we can do, right? So I'm working on it.
Okay, thank you. And I have another quick question. What advice would you give to... what advice would you give to your 20 or 30-year-old self? And what book would you recommend to aspiring designers, us aspiring designers?
Well, I talked a bit about the advice to aspiring designers, which is really this idea that you have your own uniqueness, right? Because you're from Mexico, because you're working now in a time which is a rapidly evolving time in terms of technology, and that creates chaos. And within chaos, you can find opportunity, right? If you're fast, if you're flexible, you've got to be really elastic, and you've got to embrace whatever's coming at you, right? So, I mean, that's my advice. I've just already said it, but what was the other part of your question?
The book recommendation to young designers.
Yeah.
And also to your younger 20-year-old.
Oh, to myself.
Yeah.
I said, don't listen to other people. You know.
In that
I
motorcycle.
mean, my God, the advice I've had from people is, I don't do this, don't do that. And you need to try, and you need to try again, and you need to fail, and you need to try again, you know. And that's anybody who's ever been in business will tell you that. Anybody who's innovated will tell you that, is that, you know, you need to keep on doing it. And I think, you know, if there's one thing that I find frustrating, particularly about art school, is this idea that you have to produce perfect things all the time to complete a project. So for me, you've got, how many years are you in college for? 1? 4. 4 years, that's a long time. You can make a lot of shit here. You've got all of the rapid prototyping machines down there. You know, there's free materials on the street. You need to do more quickly. And you need to use this time that you've got here, because you'll never get another time where you're free to make things in that way, just completely free. I mean, I didn't have that, but you've got it. So just use the facilities and go to more parties, because parties are where you're going to find your network, you know, the people that are useful to you later on, you know, the people that become your supporters or your customers or your network just generally. You know, so I think that the idea of, you know, doing what I did and doing it in isolation is one thing, but I think what's amazing about schools is that you're all gathered here from different countries or from different cultures, and you've got a moment, right? So don't sit in your bedroom on your Instagram. You know, get out there. There's quite a few parties tonight, apparently. Yeah.
That's a good advice. I think we may have time for one last question. Well, two more, yeah.
Hi, I'm Natalia, over here. How did you manage to refine and develop your own style and create an identity?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, how did you manage to refine and develop your own style and create an identity,
Refine
like
your
a brand?
I think that's kind of what I was talking about at the very beginning. I think there was this idea of not showing everybody what I was doing, so I was anonymous, was one of the ways. But back to this thing of practice, it was like I refined my style by just not being satisfied with what I'd made. You know, I almost kind of hate everything I've ever made, because I know what I should have done when I finished it, if that makes any sense. So every time I produce an object, I feel a deep state of dissatisfaction. And I'm only interested in the next one I'm making, which is going to be better, right? So I think, you know, practice is a big thing in terms of defining your style. Maybe also getting outside of just pure design. You know, I've noted in design schools, people have decided they want to be a designer. They're interested in design. They go and they read design magazines, or they do Pinterest or the rest of it. So you end up in a kind of design world rather than getting inspiration from engineering or from music or from, you know, the people that I interview, I always look for experiences beyond design, right? So people will come to me, they're a good designer, but I want to know, I've hired people because they've been a nurse in a hospital. And I'm like, right, if you can do that and design, that's an amazing extra skill. Or somebody that's been an engineer, you know, because you bring, or mathematician, you know, you bring a different angle. So I think it's important to have an angle beyond design, yeah?
Hello.
Hello.
What would be your advice for when you have like creative blocks?
Oh my God, panic. I don't know. I don't. I think I found out that sometimes it's really not worth forcing it. I've tried forcing it for customers, clients, you know, and you know, it ends up that actually the brief or the question wasn't the right one for me, right? And so learning to say no is quite a good way of getting through it. And, you know, I think it's the same thing as failure is quite a good thing for creative blocks. So making something bad that you can improve on, which is my method, right, is also quite a good way of getting past it. But, you know, quantity is also quite good. So many iterations of something is quite a good way to get beyond it and really learn what's going wrong. Well, you've got a creative block at the moment.
Kind of.
Oh no, how come?
Well, I'm a little bit confused sometimes while I'm designing, so yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, so I subscribe to chaos theory, right? So you just throw up a lot of things and then eventually a pattern will emerge, which is the solution, right? So just go at it from lots of different angles, some of them that you know are wrong, and then something will emerge from the chaos, right? I mean, chaos theory is my thing. I surround myself with people that are very obsessive, compulsive, detailed people, but I like to make chaos.
Okay.
So that's my advice to you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
One more. Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Nowadays, scientists devise materials like every year, every time. And when I used to study physics, I realized that when new materials or new technologies appear, it is hard and it takes time to actually start to using it in everything, like on engineering and also in design. So my question is, how do you do or what's your technique to approach to these new materials, new technologies, and this ocean of information in order to actually take advantage of it and use it for design? Like, for example, where this spike of imagination came to you to say, oh, okay, I'm going to use this aluminum foil and I'm going to use this process to make this beautiful lamp that you just showed up. And how you balance these, like you can watch the news and say, okay, we have graphene or we have aerogel, but I know that if I don't work for NASA or something like that, I cannot use it actually for something. But yes, how you manage or balance these, on one side, have the latest thing on materials and technology, and the things that you actually are able to use?
That's a good question.
A long question from... It's really good to hear from a physicist, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, you're perfectly right. New materials are usually not kind of great for mass production. They're usually out of reach. I think, you know, I've come to the conclusion that you wait for it to be industrialized in another field and then you use it. So, you know, this is a technique which is very familiar from sunglasses technology, right? Or optics, you know, so it's used, you know, vacuum deposition is used a hell of a lot in optics. And so it matured in another field and I brought it into lighting, right? So that's one thing, is just look around beyond the comfortable materials and finishes in your industry and look for other industries where it is mature. So, you know, car industry is amazing because everything is done in big volume with big investments, and you can just be a spin-off from that, right? Just like, you know, spin-off from the space race kind of thing has always been the place where you should be hovering around, right? But I think what interests me more at the moment, I think there will be a lot of mature materials, is more this idea of the mechanization, the digitalization of industry, where you can use a conventional material in a kind of new way, right? So that's what's accessible to you all right now. Like I say, in the workshops that I just passed by here, is things that you were never able to do with plastic as a student ever before, right? So that's because of the miniaturization of rapid prototyping, but CNC machines, milling machines, you know, folding machines, turning machines, all of those things are kind of just accessible and small now, and also work from the tools that you work from. Just like in the music industry, where you used to have a huge studio and a record pressing plant to be a musician in the industry, you know, now you can make a record from your bedroom, right, and stream it straight out on YouTube. same thing is happening in design, is the tools for production, the tools for distribution, the tools for marketing, and the tools for even taking payment internationally are just available to everybody right now. And that's amazing, right? I mean, literally, when I started, if I needed to promote a product, I had to write on a letter and stick a stamp on, and really just address the people that could come to my event. Now you've got the whole world at your disposal. So I think there's one thing which is materials, but there's manufacturing techniques, and then there's the product that you make, which has got an international audience which you can access, right? And that's something which has completely changed and evolved in the last 15 or 20 years in a completely new way. And it means that you can produce, you can make a brand from your own bedroom now, you know, very easily. And it doesn't necessarily need new materials. It could be a new finish. You know, new finishes are applied, like I say, in the car industry, in the paint industry, in all kinds of different places. New materials will always take a long time to mature and require industrial production to be affordable. But there's a lot of interesting things going on in that field right now, for sure. That'll take a while.
Great, thank you, Tom. I think that's it for us. We're ready for our next party. I hope you guys are ready for yours. We're going somewhere else.
We're going networking, right?
Exactly. Now it's time. It's time to sell these lights. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you for the space.